used to sit around the table with my family. There was 5 of us, and I was the only one who didn't eat the prawns. But I felt very left out. So I sat there and I peeled all the prawns, and my parents would used to fight over who would sit next to me just so that they could eat more prawns, because I would only peel them and put them back. So, yeah, that was good fun.
Saturday Breakfast with Joel Spry on ABC Radio Darwin.
Green hydrogen is gaining popularity of late. Have you heard of it? If not, you're not alone, and you're in for a short, sharp education right now, including the role that the Northern Territory can play in the production and export of what is sometimes referred to as the God molecule. Scott Hamilton is a strategic advisory panel member of the Australian-German Energy Transition Hub from the University of Melbourne. Scott, good morning to you.
Hello, Joel. How are you today?
Pretty good. How's life in Melbourne at the moment?
Things are good. It's a little bit cool, but I'm pleased we're not in lockdown at the moment. Touch wood.
Yes, we just heard from Bridget Kennedy, who runs the Sydney Library of Things in Sydney, obviously, and things aren't good there at the moment.
No, very concerning at the moment.
Yes. Anyway, let's talk about other things, Scott. Hydrogen and green hydrogen, it's often referred to, well, every now and then as the God molecule. Why is that?
Yes. Well, yeah, look, some people do, but basically it's the most fundamental element and most fundamental molecule, and that's the reason that everything sort of comes from that, which is the reason that that's been called it. And if we think about it, it's the most abundant element around, and it comes from the sun, obviously. But the problem is that you can't capture it very easily, so you've got to make it. So there's 2 ways of making it, Joel, and that's where this issue about the people have heard of green hydrogen and other forms of hydrogen, blue and brown and other colours. Right. But basically there's 2 ways to make it. One is to make it from either natural gas or fossil gas or else brown coal, which is one way, the way it's made at the moment. Or else you can make it using power such as wind and solar power. And this is where it's really exciting for places like Darwin. And the advantage of using wind and solar power, and lots of solar up in Darwin, is that you can make it without making greenhouse gas emissions. That's really important.
So it's green hydrogen. What's the big deal about hydrogen, though? Like, is this the future for us?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about it, and it's probably going to play an important role, would be my sort of comment. As the world decarbonises, so as we work out how we're going to stop emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, basically what I think is the best strategy and what is most likely going to happen is we'll electrify everything we possibly can and use that really cheap solar power and that wind power and those other sources. But there's certain things that you can't really use that for. So, for example, making steel, making fertiliser and other processes, and probably for long-haul transport. So from trucks sort of going from Darwin to Adelaide, or from ships going from Darwin to Japan, you're probably going to need something else, and we think that green hydrogen is going to play a big role there. And that's where we think there's a great market which is emerging.
Yeah, Scott, you mentioned before that this has been talked about for a fair while. Is hydrogen sort of like history repeating when it comes to other renewable energies? Like solar took a long time to get up and going, but now it's pretty popular.
Exactly, and I think just about everybody, and I think we're actually the world's biggest we're the world's biggest place for putting solar panels on our roofs, which is amazing if you think about it. But yeah, I think the thing that happened there, Joel, was that the cost of solar dropped dramatically over the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. So it was very expensive when it first started, and so people weren't doing it except for those that were really particularly wanting to use new technology, or they had a real green bent in terms of they wanting to do something for the environment. But now it just makes sense. It's a no-brainer to put solar on your roof, especially when there's lots of sunlight in places such as Darwin, and so everybody's doing it. And so we think the same thing is going to happen with renewable hydrogen or green hydrogen, that as more and more people use it and the technology sort of gets further developed, that the cost of it will start coming down. But the big thing that's driving it at the moment is that the cost of electricity, which is critical to this equation, is going through the floor, particularly with solar. we've seen an order of magnitude drop in just the last 10 years.
And what do you think the next 20 years could look like for the Northern Territory in terms of green hydrogen production in particular?
Yeah, well, look, I was really excited with the Sun Cable project, which has recently been announced. That's got backers such as Twiggy Forrest and Mike Cannon Brooks. But that's a really exciting project, which is looking at harnessing, I think it's about 10 or 13 gigawatts of solar, which is an amazing amount of solar, and putting a cable from basically Darwin to Singapore. But now this is the idea, is that you could also use that enormous solar resource to make hydrogen, and that could be used for both export to places like Japan or South Korea or Singapore, but it could be also used to manufacture new chemicals and products and things like steel and aluminium and those things. So this is where Darwin in particular is really got this unique advantage, that it's really close to Asia, it's got a port, and it's got an immense amount of solar.
How long do you think it'll be before this talk is turned into action? What do you think will happen there?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. So around the world, this is really moving quite quickly. So Germany, and you mentioned sort of on part of the Australian-German hub at Melbourne University, but Germany's currently got a strategy for hydrogen, looking at this sort of new technology, and they're spending 9 billion euros, which is 14 billion Australian dollars, which is an enormous amount of money.
Yes.
It is. And that basically what they're expecting is that the amount of money that's going to be invested in Europe, particularly over the next 10, 30 years, is about 550 billion euros. So it's an enormous amount of money. Now, what we want to do is really catch that wave here in Australia. So there's been a few movements. I think the biggest plant which is going at the moment is in the Pilbara, which is Yara, which is a big fertiliser company, one of the world's biggest fertiliser companies. That's putting in a 10 megawatt electrolyser to make green ammonia. That's really exciting. And that's probably the biggest that's happening at the moment. But I think this is going to continue to take off over this next 5 to 10 years.
Oh, it's good news. It's exciting. It's exciting, Scott.
It is very exciting, especially for places like Darwin, I think, mate.
It is. It's really good. Scott, we're getting closer to the 11 o'clock news, so we'd better go soon. But I just want to ask you about, you've got a new book that's coming out in the near future, haven't you?
Yes. So on the 31st of August, so one of my passions is looking at climate change and also water, as well as things such as solar and wind power and those things. But so it's a book called Soul Down the River, and it's actually about the Murray-Darling Basin. And it's about the water markets, and it's really how sort of Wall Street traders and robber barons have cornered the water market. So it's a book which will hit all good bookstores on the 31st of August, and we'll be really pleased to have that out with my co-author, Stuart Kells.
Excellent.
And he's at the La Trobe University.
Sounds great. Something we could talk about too on this program.
Absolutely.
At a later date. Scott, thank you very much for your time and wisdom this morning.
No worries, Joel. Pleasure as always.
Great to talk to you. That's Scott Hamilton. He is a strategic advisory panel member of the Australian-German Energy Transition Hub from the University of Melbourne. He's a lot of other things as well. Really interesting there. What's happening here with green hydrogen?
This year's